Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending September 10th. And do you know what that means? It means it's the start of a Mercury retrograde. We're going to get through the whole week, but at the very end of the week, Mercury goes retrograde. We're actually in our shadow period this week of the Mercury retrograde. There's a shadow period the first week before and then the week after. So, to be honest with you, the time of this recording, we're not even close to the shadow period starting, and I can already see Mercury retrograde at work. So yeah, it's gonna be a little bit crazy, but there's some good points in there too. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get to it. And we're going to get started as we always do with Aries. Still have Jupiter in Aries, and that is, it creates good points and bad points, really. So we're going to start with the good, as Jupiter moves into a sextile with Mars this week. Aries focus is really on family, on those that you love, and Mars influence in relationships kind of comes in to provide a little bit of a helpful hand when you've got just so many things going on. That Mars energy really does sort of help out a lot. When especially in terms of having a very busy schedule, not just around your family, but with everything that you guys have going on. So that is good. The issue, I guess, if we can call it an issue, because it probably is, the challenge is when Jupiter moves into opposition with Mercury, which is in Libra. Mercury's influence is really around those that love you, those that support you. And so this becomes an issue because it does feel like you are not getting the support that you require, especially if you have a really busy schedule and a lot of things going on. That energy influence from Mars is great. However, everybody has, so much energy, and even Mars help kind of sort of will give you a little bit of a boost. It's in some ways kind of like drinking a little energy drink to get a little bit more energy, but too much energy can burn you out also. So the bottom line here is that this is Mercury, and Mercury is all about communication. If you communicate your needs properly, you stand a better chance of getting the help that you require. If you don't communicate your needs properly, chances are you're not going to get the help that you require. So when it comes to Mercury, I feel like this is a big human being issue, is that these days we just really have a hard time communicating for whatever reason. And most of the time the reasons are or do rotate around issues with the wrong types of communication. So sarcastic communication, coming out and saying, man, it would be nice if somebody would help me do this and that and other thing. Most of the time we're throwing out a fishing line and hoping that we get a bite, and most of the time we don't get a bite, and that becomes a problem because now you're sitting there feeling like the person is just saying F you to you, and really they just weren't understanding what it was that you were saying, or didn't realize that you were the one that they were requiring help from, things like that. So how do you fix this problem? It's a very easy fix. One of the easiest fixes of any problem out there. And that is that instead of the little jokes that have truth in them, the sarcasm, even just sort of the broad statement of, I sure wish somebody would help me, change that. Don't use that form of communication. Change it around to say, hey, I have a lot of things on my plate. What can you do to support me? And if they can't do anything to support you because they have too many things on your plate or on their plate, well, then you know. And by knowing, you can maybe look in a different direction, or the two of you can rework your schedules together to make sure that you can support each other. It makes things a heck of a lot easier than sort of throwing out this sort of fishing type of communication, which just really doesn't work very well. So that's what I have going on for you guys this week. And good luck with that. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Taurus. We got a lot of exciting things going on in Taurus. Let's talk about the first thing that is good news, and that is that Venus is moved out of a square with Uranus. So that means no more T-square. It means that there's only a square between Uranus and Saturn, which was a pain in the butt before, but it was a much bigger pain in the butt when Venus was a part of it. And Venus is moving on out of there. So that is good news, right? So the challenge moves from a fairly large challenge to a much smaller challenge, something that we've been very familiar with, actually, most of this year. So that's the good news. The square course continues, and with your focus on relationships, and in some cases also your day-to-day schedule. That square with Saturn is very much focused on the mind and how the mind works. And so this actually is a brilliant challenge, because these incidences are going to come up within your relationships that basically throw you into that crazy mind tornado that you get into when something happens within these relationships that makes you question the relationship. And it can be as big as a breakup, but it can also be as small as a little miscommunication. Little miscommunications happen all the time, and we blow them out of proportion. And where does that blowing them out of proportion start? It doesn't start here, it starts here. So Saturn really is focused on how your mind tends to blow things out of proportion. When you go to that place where you start the angry thinking, and your mind sort of basically convinces you that the person doesn't love you, they don't value you, they're just using you, and that just makes things so much worse. So this week it's really important to be careful with that. It's important to be aware that your mind is going to that place. It's important to put a time limit, a very strict time limit, on how far your mind goes into that place, because the more you spend that time entertaining those thoughts, the angrier you're going to get, and there's a bigger possibility of you actually lashing out when there's no need to lash out. So you do want to definitely be aware of that. Now, the grand sextile between Pluto and Neptune continues with all three planets retrograde. So all the planets interacting with Uranus are retrograde this week also. And retrogrades, in some cases they slow things down, and in some cases that's annoying, and in some cases that's actually a really good thing. A lot of times there's several Tauruses that I know that are just going all the time. They don't like things slowing down. But you need things to slow down every now and then, just to make sure that you're on the right track. You think about it in terms of the Chariot card, the tarot card, the Chariot. The Chariot it means two different things. One meaning is you're going full speed ahead towards your goals. That's great. But when you flip that card, you've gone so fast, you didn't see the rock in the middle of the road, and you've toppled the entire chariot. Now you have a broken chariot, you can't move forward. Retrogrades are kind of similar, except we're not breaking the chariot. We are slowing the chariot down so that you can see that there are rocks in the road that might break up that chariot. And by being able to see those rocks, you can avoid them. So it's a slow progression forward, not a quick progression forward, but that slow down is helpful because it does give you the opportunity to be able to see things that maybe you might be missing if you're going a little bit too fast. In terms of this grand sextile, Pluto's focus is very much on how you think, and Neptune's focus is on those that you love. With your focus on relationships and your day-to-day schedule, this, of course, can be really tricky. Your mind plays a lot into what it is that you're doing and how you plan your days. So if your mind is saying, I just don't have time for anything, you're going to believe that you don't have time for anything at all, especially in terms of relationships, whether they be personal, professional, whatever. These relationships, all relationships need work in some way, shape, or form. So in terms of the relationships, of course, that you're responsible for, so you take care of your children, you take care of your household, but maybe you just don't have that extra time to go visit your parents, kind of a thing. In terms of that, how you think about that really does make or break what it is that you're doing. What it comes down to is you have all the time in the world, depending on how you look at your schedule. So, and how you think about your schedule. So, of course, if you have a very heavy loaded schedule, and you don't have anything to do on Saturday, it's not that you don't have the time. Maybe you just need some rest time instead of taking that time to go and see other people. So really, you want to be focused on how your mind is sort of working against you in terms of your schedule and how that plays out. You can always find extra time. You just have to, in some cases, be a little bit creative with your schedule. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And now we're going to move on to Gemini. We have Mars in Gemini this week, moving into a trine with Mercury, which moves into a grand trine as the moon moves into Aquarius about Wednesday this week. And the good news about these trines is trines are very helpful aspects. So you have, with a grand trine, you have a planet in every single air sign, because of course, that is what Gemini is. So grand trines are very, very, very helpful aspects. And the moon coming in to sort of help this out really does make a huge difference. It seems a little weird because Geminis are really not known for being emotional, but we need that emotional support every now and then, even if you're a Gemini or any air sign, intellectual sign for that matter. Intellectuals aren't known for emotions, but we do have them. Trust me on that. With a trine happening between Mars and Mercury most of the week, Mercury being in Libra at this time. And Mercury's focus really is on those that support you. When in terms of relationships, this can be, well, it can be a good thing or a bad thing. Geminis are not known necessarily for reaching out for support. They're a very independent sign. And when you have Mars influencing Gemini, that's a lot of energy going into an already extremely energetic sign. But at the same time, this can also mean that you grossly overbook yourself. I've got all these things to do and all this time to do it. Yes, I can do all of these things. And then of course, by the time you get there, you realize that that's not necessarily the case. You just don't have the time and the energy to do it all yourself. So this is actually really helpful because it does open up the possibility of support for you when you ask for it. There's also an element, though, that Mars brings into relationships for Geminis, and relationships are, I can't say they're difficult for Geminis. It's just that Geminis are so intellectually driven. It's really hard for them to connect with other people, if that makes sense. And so this actually can go one of two ways. Either Mars is very much putting a lot of energy into building the relationships that you need in order to be successful, but there's also an element of maybe aggression there, because Mars is all about aggression as well. So it's almost like you're surrounded by so many people, it just drives you insane. And you just have to find a way to get away from all these people because you just can't handle it anymore. And that's okay too. The bottom line is that when it comes to intellectual signs, intellectuals really need that quiet space, that safe space, that space that nobody else is in, because the brain is going 10,000 miles a minute so much that you need quiet in order to quiet that down too. So just make sure that you have a little bit of a balance there. Mars also moves into a grand sextile with the moon on Wednesday, and as well as Jupiter. That little bit of a kick right there in the middle of the week is really good, because of course the moon is focused here on the mind, on how you think. And we're talking emotional thoughts here. If air signs have emotions, which they do, this is where they're going to be. They're going to be hidden here inside the mind, but they're not necessarily shown on the surface or on the outside, if that makes sense. This moment sort of gives you an opportunity to really be able to identify where your brain goes to that crazy emotional place, right? And when it does go to that crazy emotional place, it also provides a bit of an opportunity for you to be able to see where there is where you have the opportunity to be able to control that a little bit. When our minds go to that crazy emotional place, we don't have any control over it. It just keeps going, and it keeps getting bigger, and it keeps getting bigger, and it keeps getting bigger. And you know, the more bigger it gets, the more you tend to panic and sort of act on what's going on in your mind. That isn't a good idea. That is never a good idea, because you wind up screwing up things that, you know, maybe you don't want screwed up right now. And, you know, unfortunately, by doing that, you put yourself at risk to lose something that is really important to you, something that you've been working on, especially in terms of your relationships. So with Mercury being such an important part of all of this going on, and Mercury being your ruling planet, communication is important. You don't want to under communicate. You don't want to over communicate. That's a big Gemini problem. It's an air sign problem, period. You don't want to under communicate. You don't want to over communicate. You just want to get straight and to the point. I need the support for this. And if you can't provide the support for this, that's okay. I will find the support somewhere else. But you don't want to get yourself into a situation to where you're doing something hoping that somebody's going to see that you need help, and they don't see it, and that just makes you angry. And then you wind up wanting to end a relationship with somebody over that. That's a really crappy reason to end a relationship with somebody, if that makes sense. So no mind readers here. Nobody is a mind reader. You don't want the expectation that people are mind readers. You just want to communicate what it is that you need and then go from there. If you can't get what you need from one person, you can always move on to another person, because, you know, you Geminis are pretty social people. You have a lot of support. You just have to look at, you know, what you have as honestly as possible, if that makes sense. So that is what I have for you guys. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Cancer. Not a whole lot of planetary action going on in Cancer. Not a bad thing. We are focused on money, and we are also focused on long-term goals this week. Long-term financial goals is really something that has to be looked at. If it's not looked at, trust me when I say, take it from me, long-term goals are not necessarily something that I have put a lot of focus on in my life. And at this particular point of my life, I am now starting to see why that is a bad thing. So the younger that you can start on that, the better. Hopefully I got some younglings in here who will benefit from that. But long-term financial goal planning is really important. Without the planning for your long-term financial goals, time just passes and it goes by so quickly, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I was going to do this, I was going to start planning for my retirement 10 years ago and it just didn't happen, and now you're kind of, and then 10 years will go by again. So really important to get started on that if you haven't. This is a really good opportunity though for you guys to take the time to focus on not just your long-term financial planning, but your short-term financial planning as well. In terms of goals, in terms of different things that you plans or goals that you have, it's time to see how much money you need for them and implement a system to save the money to be able to purchase those things and to be able to achieve those goals. Also, on this list of long-term goals is also very necessary to make sure that you have the finances to achieve these goals. So in some cases, long-term goals means travel. Obviously, nobody has $5,000 just in their pocket to go to Europe whenever they want. You have to plan that out. What is something that a lot of people do that I have seen a lot of in the last several years actually is people who say that they want to do things, myself included. I have all these plans, I want to do them, got to get the money together to do it, right? And it really kind of feels like it's just so much money that you're never going to be able to get it together. And so a lot of times you just wind up not doing it. And that's very sad. And that's very unmotivating. And it does create a pattern that you fall into, to where every single time this comes up, it sort of proves that you're never going to be able to achieve any of these goals. Really important that you do want to be aware of that, as well as do whatever you can to avoid falling into that trap, if that makes sense. It's kind of a crappy place to be because it really doesn't feel like it's productive at all. In fact, it's very counterproductive. You just wind up getting your hopes up and then shooting them down, and getting your hopes up and then shooting them down constantly, and that's no fun at all. Outside of that, there isn't a whole lot of stuff to really talk about in Cancer, which is kind of a good thing. If you have goals that you're trying to plan right now, if you have money goals that you're trying to plan right now, you don't really want a whole bunch of stuff getting in the way of that. So having no planetary influence, it actually is working in your favor this week. So good luck with those plans, guys. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Leo. Leo is still also focused on long-term goals and is influenced by the dark moon this week. Lilith, also referred to as the dark moon. She is a mathematical point in the chart, so it's not something to where there's an actual planet that exists there. However, her influence is really important, actually. The Lilith is, mythology wise, this particular point was named after a female who lived in Puritan times, was forced to deal with the very strict Puritan rules of how things were. You were covered from here all the way down to your ankles. Sex was in the missionary position. It was for making babies only. We ladies weren't really supposed to enjoy that. She didn't like that. She did not like that life. She didn't like being stuffed in that box, and she rebelled and was shunned by her village because she tore off all those clothes and went running naked through the forest, and with all of the other witches, so to speak, demanding her freedom, even though she was shunned by her whole family. So in astrology, the Lilith is all about going against the grain. It's going against what everybody expects of you and saying, I'm going to do this in a completely different way just to see how it plays out, kind of a thing. She's very interesting. And when you're talking about your long-term goals, it's very important. The Lilith's influence here is actually very important in terms of planning out those goals, because she is actually showing you a way to do this in a way that you've never done it before. So for instance, if normally when you're spending time focused on long-term goals and planning those goals, you do it the same way that you've always done. And that's fine. I'm not saying that that way doesn't work. But the Lilith is saying, hey, let's try a different way, something that's like completely wackadoo that we would never have thought of before, just to see if it works, kind of a thing. And I'm not saying that, it might work, it might not. I mean, we take that risk every single day when we take a risk, because that is what it is. However, you might be pleasantly surprised that something that you didn't think would work at all is actually going to work better than the system that you've implemented in the past. So this is a little bit scary when you think about it, but it could be exactly what you've been needing all this time to be able to achieve this goal. So of course, you want to look at it in both ways as well. Yes, it's a little bit scary, but it might get you to the finish line of that goal a lot faster than if you continued on the path that you're on right now. So that is what I have for you, Leos. Because the good news, of course, is that Venus is on, she is out of there. She is right at the beginning of the week. She's there. She's out of there. Little bit of an opposition with Saturn right in the beginning of the week, but then she moves on and she's out of there. So no planets influencing Leo, no more T-squares, no more challenges. It's just straightforward movement for you guys, which is really good. So that's what I have for you guys. And we're moving on to Virgo. Lots going on in Virgo. Of course, we still have the sun in Virgo halfway through at this point, as well as Venus moves into Virgo this week. And of course, we got good things and bad things going on. Let's start with the challenges or the difficulties as the sun and Venus both move into a square with Mars. Square with Mars, Venus and Mars square is really brings out an imbalance of logic and emotion. So it makes it very difficult to be able to make decisions using both in some ways. It's not impossible. You just have to work a little bit harder. With a logic and emotion imbalance, it's always best to make decisions based on what's the smartest thing to do, and of course how it feels. And that's how you're sort of using both the logic and emotion to be able to make an educated decision. However, with your focus on career this week, this square with Mars is very much focused on relationships. And so this is really what could be getting in your way or making it difficult to make these decisions, whether they be business relationships or personal relationships. It sort of creates this challenge where it almost feels like you have to choose one side or the other. You can't really easily incorporate both, if that makes sense. So that might be a little bit difficult, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. The sun also is in opposition with Neptune this week. Neptune's focus is very much on the home, and Neptune's retrograde does bring up some deep-seated emotional stuff as well. So that can be a bit of a challenge, specifically if you're really focused on what you need to do to grow in your career, but you have a lot of things at home or personal things at home that are sort of demanding your attention as well. Now, the good news is you're Virgos. So if anybody can manage a schedule, it is you guys. You just have to be flexible. And I think that that's really the big challenge for Virgos. Virgos like to have everything planned out, ready to go, and they don't really care for changes in that schedule. Although, whether you care for the changes in the schedule or not, you guys are masters at being able to move from one thing to another. So it's annoying. It's not the end of the world. The good news is the sun's trine with Uranus this week. The sun's trine with Uranus this week actually is really, really helpful, especially in terms of that schedule, because Uranus is right there on the cusp of your day-to-day schedule and relationships. So this tells me actually that with the challenges of flexibility that you do have coming up, there may be some that you work with or some relationships that you have that will be helpful in terms of being able to either help you reschedule things, maybe take some of the load off of you so that you can focus on what you need to focus on at home, different things like that. So it may seem like an oh my God moment at first, but when you broaden things out and see just how much support you really have, it's not, doesn't have to be the end all of everything either. So just try to avoid going to that space where you just panic and go, that's it, I obviously can't do anything because all this other stuff is coming up, right? This is life and we're human beings, and in the life that we have right now, stuff comes up all the time. We have to be able to be flexible, we have to be able to coordinate, we have to be able to handle all of those crazy life things that come up at the last minute. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're going to go ahead and move on to Libra. We've got all kinds of fun things going on in Libra because Mercury is in Libra. And what's not fun is that the retrograde starts in Libra on the 10th at the very end of the week this week. So we will have about a week of Mercury being in retrograde in Libra, and then the rest of the retrograde will be in Virgo. So it is definitely going to directly affect you guys for about a week or so. And being in the shadow period, you're going to definitely find that the retrograde is affecting you a lot this week because we're in the shadow period of the retrograde. So a lot of patience is necessary to start off with. Mercury is, of course, in opposition with Jupiter this week as well, which does create a little bit of a challenge. Oppositions always create a little bit of a challenge. And when your focus is on those that support you, Jupiter's focus is on those you support or those that you love. Jupiter being in retrograde, it kind of may seem like those people that are supposed to support you are not really supporting you this week. And that can really feel like you're wasting your time. Libras are all about supporting other people. They always have been. In some cases, that's why they're referred to as martyrs, because they tend to support more than they get support. It doesn't mean that Libras are used to that. I don't think that anybody should ever have to get used to not having the support that they need. But communication is important, and how you communicate the need for that support is very important. Now, one of the issues with that Libra martyrdom, we're going to say, is that because Libras are known for being martyrs, because they tend to quietly sit there and hope that somebody sees that they need help. And that's just, it hasn't worked. Obviously, it hasn't worked for you yet. It's not going to work for you from here on out. And so because of that, this week, Mercury is coming in and saying, hey, don't just sit there and hope that they see that you need help. Say something, stand up, be loud about it. By doing that, and make sure you do it properly too. The sarcasm, the little jokes, things like that, those don't work. Okay, flat out, I don't know why we keep doing it. They don't work. You have to use your voice. You have to go in there and you say, hey, if you want me to do this, this is what you need to do for me, kind of a thing. Or I've done a lot of things for you. I don't ask much. I do need your help with this. And if you don't want to do it aggressively, that's okay. Just make sure that when you're asking for help, you're not fishing for it. You're asking for it. Asking for it means you come out and you say, hey, I really need your help on this day. Are you available? And then that way, there's no possible way that they can misunderstand what it is that you're saying, or that there's no possible way that they can sort of get out of that loophole. Now, here's a really good example, Ashley, that somebody used on my son one day when they were moving. And he said, hey, you wouldn't want to come with me to my new house and help me unload this, would you? And of course, my son said, no, I wouldn't want to come with you. Well, he didn't ask him the right question. He gave my son an out to not help him. And, by using the words in the way that he did. And by doing that, he didn't get the help that he was looking for. And so, I heard about it later and I told him flat out, I said, well, if you had worded it in a different way, maybe it would have come out in a different way. So you got to think about that in terms of communication. And with Mercury going retrograde in your sign first, communication is going to be most important for you. You're going to find a lot of instances coming up because of this retrograde that are going to force you to communicate in a better way. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you want. So you do want to be mindful of that. Now, Mercury is in a trine with Mars this week, and on Wednesday, when the moon moves into Aquarius, that becomes a grand trine, which is a planet in all three air signs. Grand trines are really very helpful. And the moon coming into play in this actually is a big deal because the moon and air signs don't really go together. Air signs are intellectuals. Libra is an intellectual sign, although the more emotional of the three intellectual signs. And the moon's focus is really on the mind, with Mars' focus being on relationships, and you're looking for support. You really want to pay attention to where your mind goes to that ugly place that's telling you you don't have support. You don't deserve support. You can do it all yourself because it's better if you just do it all yourself because everybody else screws it up, kind of a thing. Your mind can be your worst enemy when you think about it. So when these opportunities come up, you want to have control over that. You want to take control over that. When your mind starts going into that crazy place, you want to say, hey, stop. We're not going there right now. That's counterproductive. It's not helping us right now. We need to focus on where we can get the support that we need. And that's all we need to focus on. We don't need to focus on whether we deserve the help, whether the help is available, worrying. All this stuff. Your mind really wastes a lot of your time when you think about it. And this is where the Grand Trine is very helpful. It's showing you this so that you can eliminate that problem by being aware of that problem, if that makes sense. So you get a lot of stuff going on this week in terms of getting the support that you need. And communication is a big deal. I know a lot of Libras. I haven't seen not one of them communicate in the way that they need to communicate in order to get what they need. In all the years that I've known Libras, I have not seen one of them communicate properly. So this is a really good opportunity for you guys to learn the right way to communicate, to be able to throw that martyrdom right out the window. Why do you guys need to be martyrs at all? It really is destructive to you. It really is a waste of your time. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio has no planets in it this week, which is good. And focus is all on you this week, with a bit of an element of that secret closet sort of sneaking in there a little bit. And when your focus is on you and a little bit on that secret closet, that actually is a very uncomfortable place to be, especially for a very emotional sign like Scorpio. Now, let me just explain here a little bit. We all have this secret closet. We all have emotional stuff that we stuff into ourselves for a later time because we don't want to deal with it in the moment. And actually, what tends to happen is it just stays in that closet. I mean, how many of you have that closet full of crap that you just can't get rid of, but you have nowhere to put it and you're not even using it, kind of a thing, right? Our emotional closet is very much the same. We have instances that happen in our lives through childhood, our young adult life, things that affect us in an emotional way. And when we don't want to deal with the emotional stuff, we just sort of stuff it away, put it in the back burner. Let's just deal with it later. Unfortunately, the more that you do that, the more you stuff in there, the more stuff is in there. Now, think of this closet as a thing. You're actually stuffing so much stuff in the closet, you can't shut the door anymore. And when you finally do get the door latched, the minute you open that door, all the stuff is going to come billowing out. Now, when you have an emotional closet that's that full, what happens is it doesn't take much to set off all of that emotional stuff just coming out. For me personally, this did happen in 2012. There were so many things that took place in that time that I swear I cried for an entire year. And I don't like crying in public. That was too bad. I was crying in public. It just was so hard to get past that. And it was the bulk of the year where I just, could not handle stuffing another thing in there. It's uncomfortable. It's not pleasant and it's not fun. However, I felt a lot better afterwards because I did manage to get a lot of that stuff out of there. And that's really what it's all about. So that is good. My advice, though, is to not get to that extreme, to not let that happen. And that's why this week, with focus being on your inner self, it's important to take that time. When things come up, you're going to have triggers. Triggers are instances that trigger some sort of emotional impulse from pain that is not necessarily from what's going on right now, but it's being triggered from something that happened previously. And that makes things very difficult because it may be that you just have somebody coming up to you saying, I'm sorry, I don't have time to hang out today. And that triggers an emotional abandonment response because your father was never there when you were younger. And then now, instead of just saying, oh, okay, that's cool, we'll hang out tomorrow, you will have a more of a tendency to overreact and said, you know what, fine, let's just never hang out ever again. We're not friends anymore, kind of a thing. It's kind of dumb, to end a friendship over something like that. But when you think about it, that's what triggers do. You emotionally respond to triggers. Now, of course, triggers are your responsibility, and working through the trigger is helpful in the moment, but you can lessen the trigger by understanding, accepting, and in some cases, letting go of your old emotional pain. Also, that means cleaning out that closet a little bit. You have more room for other stuff that, you just can't deal with in the moment, because this kind of stuff doesn't just happen in childhood. It happens all our lives. And so consequently, you're constantly putting stuff in that closet. If you never clean it out, you get to a point where you can't stuff anything else in that closet and everything comes billowing out at once. And there's a lot of instances that will trigger that. Loss of somebody that you love is one of the biggest reasons or biggest things that do trigger an emotional response like that. And in the example that I was giving you, that was one of those things that happened several times that year, actually. So when you think about it, And it's uncomfortable. Nobody ever really wants to deal with their emotional stuff. It's not about whether you want to or not. It's about what keeps you healthy. And emotional health and physical health go hand in hand. The more stuff you've got stuffed in that closet, the more physical problems you're going to have. Because, of course, anytime you're emotionally stuffing, it does over time affect you physically as well. So keep that in mind. And that is what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Sagittarius, the moon kicks off the week in Sagittarius this week, moving into a trine with Venus, and focus is still a little bit on the past this week. So this moon Venus trine actually is very helpful. If you are looking back on the past for inspiration, these two planets lining up at the beginning of the week is actually going to be very helpful with that in terms of finding ways that you've used before, creative ways that you've used before in order to help you out with certain situations or goals or things that you have going on this week, which is lovely. The moon also moves into a sextile with Saturn. Saturn continues to be retrograde, and Saturn's focus is really on the mind. And this is also very interesting because when we look back at the past, we tend to look back in the past in a glorified way. So we don't necessarily see the bad things that happened. We only see the good things that happened. And that's not necessarily a good place to be, because you may be looking at, say, a past relationship and only seeing the good things about the relationship and ignoring the things that weren't so great, which is the reason why you're not in the relationship anymore in the first place. So Saturn's influence in this sort of helps you to kind of make sure that you are putting the responsibilities of the emotional stuff in the right hands, whether it be your hands or somebody else's hands, which is a little bit helpful. Now, the moon square with Neptune does create a little bit of a challenge here because Neptune's focus is on home. And Neptune, though Neptune does rule all of the intuitive abilities, there's also an element of deep-seated emotional stuff going on. And when you get the moon and Neptune lining up in this way, you're looking at the possibility of an emotional disaster happening. So you want to be very much aware that problems from the past that are not resolved are going to continue to keep coming up. And the moon's influence in this is very strong at the beginning of the week. Now, as we move into the rest of the week, not a lot of planetary influences are going on at this time because the moon is really the only one. And being that most of the time it was in your sign last week, it has very little time in your sign this week. So we're looking basically at maybe an aftermath of something that happened at the end of last week, sort of tapering off this week, leaving things kind of clean for you to proceed with whatever it is that you've got going on this week. In terms of focus on the past, it is really the past can be a beneficial tool, or it can be a place that just swallows you up and you don't and you lose production in that way. So you do want to be careful that you're looking back on the past in the proper way, a way that makes sense to what you're doing now, and not in a way to where you're going to get lost in the memories of what could have been, if things aren't exactly the way that you want them to be right now. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to Capricorn. Of course, we still have Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto continues to be retrograde in Capricorn and focuses very much on the mind this week, or continues to be on the mind. We're going to be moving our focus here in a week or two, which is good. But Pluto's retrograde in the past, or I'm sorry, in the mind, is sort of tricky when you think about it, because Pluto is all about personal power. It's all about transformation. this may be one of those instances where you're trying to change your thoughts, your thought pattern to something that's a little bit more productive, and it just feels like you can't. Like you can't get out of looking at things in a very pessimistic way. And that is very annoying, especially for Capricorns, because you guys are pessimistic by nature, or I should say realistic by nature, however you want to put that. And in some cases it's hard to change that. And if you really need to change that, it's really frustrating to be able to move forward with what it is that you need to do. But we do have help. And the good news is Uranus is, I'm sorry, Pluto's grand sextile with Uranus and Neptune is very helpful. Neptune's focus is on those that you love. Uranus's focus is on relationships. This is not all about you. There are people out there to help you. And I know this is hard for Capricorns to take, okay? But it's okay to ask for help every now and then. If you are in a slump and you just can't seem to get out of that slump, that's why you have friends. That's why you have family. That's why you have all these people to come in and talk to that can help you, maybe help you see it from a different perspective. There's so many instances that we get into where we can't get out of it ourselves. A lot of mental illness is like that. We just can't seem to find a way out ourselves. And that's why we have therapy. That's why we talk about our problems to our friends. That's why there's so many resources for this. And yet the person still insists that they're the only person that can get themselves out of that. And the truth of the matter is that it's very, very hard for a person to get themselves out of that. Most people need assistance. Most people need help with that. So this sort of provides or opens up the opportunity for the help. And to be honest with you, it is absolutely 100% worth it for you to take that help. Because when you take that help, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're strong enough to admit that you're not Wonder Woman or Superman, and that you do need help every now and then, which does make things a little bit helpful. The other good news is that's the only aspect with Pluto, is a very helpful aspect. So you don't have anything else going against you. It's just forward movement from here. So when you're in that space where you're just mentally, you just can't do it anymore, the best thing to do is to talk to somebody. I have found actually that the more I think about my problems, the bigger they get in my mind. And when I sit down and put a voice to those problems, I'm starting to see that the problem really isn't as bad as I'm making it out to be. But in my head, it's huge. And this is a very counterproductive in many ways, because the bigger you make that problem, the more that problem is going to hold you back. And that's really what we're trying to avoid here, especially you Capricorns who don't like to be held back by nothing. So that is what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Aquarius. We have Saturn still in Aquarius, and by Tuesday, Wednesday, the moon in Aquarius as well. That's sort of a weird thing. Being an Aquarius myself, we're not known to be emotional people. And it's not because we're not emotional, it's because we don't show it. That's what it comes down to. But it does happen a lot up in here. The secret is out. It does happen a lot up in here. The moon comes in, creates a grand trine though, which is beautiful. Grand trine between the moon and Mercury before it goes retrograde, as well as Mars, bringing that sort of energetic Mars element into what we're doing now. And we focus on the mind and how we think. This is actually a beautiful lineup here. It really, truly is, because it's showing us how we're thinking about what we need to do. It's showing us how we're communicating with ourselves. It's showing us how much energy we put into how we're speaking to ourselves and the type of energy that we're using to speak to ourselves as well. This is all very useful information. And this sort of, I wouldn't say that Aquarians are perfectionists, although they are to a certain extent, but we're also realists. And the reality is that it doesn't matter how quote unquote perfect you are. Everybody talks to themselves in the wrong way, a way that is unproductive, a way that is not supportive, a way that sort of energetically holds us back in a way. And the moon coming in and creating this grand trine is saying the issue here is not necessarily what you're doing, it's how you're approaching it in your mind. A good example of that for me, honestly, it is something that I struggle with a lot, is in terms of productivity with my business. I know what I need to do, but in my mind, it sounds like so much work. There's just so many things. And so it exhausts me, and I immediately just sort of don't want to do it, kind of a thing. And so what I've done is I've learned to train my brain to focus on one thing at a time. This is the next thing that I need to do. I have everything else that I need to do written down, but right now my mind is only focused on this one thing that I need to do. I need to get this recording done. That's so much easier for me, because now my brain isn't exploding with all the stuff that needs to be done, right? So it's sort of a little trick that I play on myself. It still means that I can get things done, but I'm not overwhelming myself at the same time, if that makes sense. Saturn continues to be in a square with Uranus. And of course, by Thursday, the moon is going to join that square with Uranus as well, which may cause a bit of a challenge. Uranus is very much focused on your daily schedule. And of course, we're going to what our daily schedule is. There is a lot of opportunity to sort of mentally panic about all the things that need to take place. And in some cases, spend too much time in here planning it out and not enough time actually doing it. This is also the drawback to an Aquarius in many ways, because Aquarians spend too much time mentally and not enough time doing. That's why I always say I love to have an earth sign working with me, because I'm great at coming up with ideas, but not exactly great at following through with those ideas. Do I have an earth sign working with me? No. So I have to be the one that comes up with the ideas and does the work and follow through as well. So it's basically, it is creating a bit of a challenge, but it's a challenge that we've had over and over and over again. And by putting the spotlight on that challenge, it gives us an opportunity to kind of sort of go, oh, we're creating this problem for ourselves, and maybe we don't want to do that anymore. And so it gives you an opportunity to kind of look at that and see where you can change that challenge and make it so that it's not a challenge anymore. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we are going to move on to Pisces. Neptune continues to be in a grand sextile with Uranus and Pluto. And Neptune is at the top point of that grand sextile as well. Focus is on the home this week for you guys. And with Pluto's focus on the mind and Uranus's focus on your day-to-day activities, it's a perfect opportunity to really pay attention to the changes that need to be done in the home currently right now. For instance, everybody's got that long list of projects that they want to do, and it's, always something that, they'll get to eventually when they can get to it. Well, this week is a good time to really actually get to it. You have the time. And as long as you are not allowing your mind to convince you that you don't have the time, you probably can get a lot more done than you think you can. I always look at sometimes a project going, oh my God, that's just going to take me forever. And then when I actually get to it, it really doesn't take that long at all. It's like that giant pile of dishes in the sink. You go, oh my God, I'm going to be standing here doing dishes forever. Really, it's like 15, 20 minutes and then you're done. So you just want to be aware of, how your mind sort of plays against you in that way. Neptune does move into opposition with the sun this week. The sun being career, and so there's a little bit of that time trying to juggle between the projects that you have at home that you want to dedicate some time to, but work getting in the way a little bit, if that makes sense. So basically, it's not so much about I have to take a week off from work in order to do this. I mean, in a perfect world, we all wish we could do that. That's not necessarily something that can be done all the time. So it's more about managing your time wisely. You need rest time, you need work time, you need play time. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you have time to get started on this project. One thing that is coming to mind around this for me is that I think we tend to spend too much time thinking about how the project needs to be done, if that makes sense. Or wanting to start the project and finish the project in one sitting, which is not always the case. You can't always do that. And I'm one of those people. It's like, I'm not even going to start the project unless I can finish the project. And the truth is, the project's never going to get started. So rather than thinking along those lines, it's best to actually look at it in terms of, as long as I get it started and I keep working on it, eventually it'll get done, and it'll get done faster than if you wait until you have all kinds of time to start and finish it all in the same day, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys. And that is what I have for the horoscopes this week. A little bit crazy. Of course, Mercury, like I said, is going retrograde at the very end of this week. So everybody make sure that you prepare for that as much as you possibly can. And if you can't, that's okay. Just make sure that you are very careful about what you sign. Make sure you read everything. Just take your time. Mercury retrogrades aren't like, oh my God, I need to be in bed for a week because I can't take it. That's really not what Mercury retrogrades are all about. They are all about paying more attention than you normally do. And that's really what the Mercury retrograde is all about for me. Anyways, I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Make it a great week, Mercury retrograde or not.